Was there a point where you decided that like you wanted to just do YouTube like for your for your job? Was there like a moment or a video where you're like, oh man, this is definitely what I want to do?
That's a good question. From the moment I started this, it was always a dream.
Hmm.
I used to buy a lot of products myself and test them out, and I always love having the latest tech. So if I can have a career out of playing with the latest tech, that would be awesome. So it was always a dream, but not something that I'm not going to say I didn't think is possible, but I knew was far fetched. That did not stop me from trying, but it wasn't something that I said to myself, this is my plan and this is what I'm going to do. So I did not quit my job to do full-time YouTube. And this is where I think my path is a bit unconventional in the sense that most people I think who have that dream would either quit their jobs and dedicate full-time towards YouTube and try to make something out
Hmm.
of that. And that's commendable. That's awesome. And then there's those who are a bit more risk averse who would do it in parallel to their jobs. And then once they get to a point where they're, well established, making some revenue, then they would quit their jobs and dedicate full time to YouTube. I didn't neither of those. I still have a full time job right now, which makes it even more challenging because technically I am juggling two jobs, and YouTube is a job. I treated it as such from day one because otherwise there's no way you can make it.
Right.
It is a hobby, it is a passion for sure, but you cannot look at it as a hobby. A hobby is something you do in your spare time. If you don't have the time, that's fine. A hobby is something you do when you feel like it. If you don't feel like it, that's fine. I could never afford to do that. I can't tell you how many times I had to drag my feet to actually produce content. And you can imagine, after a long day, after a 9 to 5 job, after a long day, after a long week, the last thing you want to do is more work. But I had to for months and years. So it was always a job for me, a second job, which made it even more difficult to grow because you have only so many hours in a day. But I'm happy. It took about maybe 3.5 years before I started to see any results, which makes it even more challenging because you're investing a lot of time and seeing no return on your investment. But I stuck in there, kept grinding, kept putting in the hours, and eventually, about 3.5 years in, I started seeing some returns. And this year was the first, or last year, 24, was the first year where it was starting to become significant. So I started to see the potential. This could be a full-time job eventually.
Hmm.
And that dream is closer to reality. But as of today, I'm still juggling it with another full-time job.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Going and just quitting your job, I think is pretty risky. I think most people kind of try to work a job and then kind of transition into full-time YouTube. But yeah, what you
Yeah,
said totally makes sense. And it sounds like it wasn't necessarily like a specific moment, but kind of gradually over time you started to see the results of your work, and that's when you kind of decided that that's
correct.
what you wanted to do.
Indeed, indeed. And I mean, if I was in my early 20s, I'll say, I'd probably be less risk averse. I would have done something as huge as quitting and trying this for a while, and then I can if it doesn't work out, I do something else. But mid 20s, early 20s is different than mid to late 30s, which is where I'm at today. So I have to keep things in perspective as well with my how much risk I take in terms of these decisions. And this is why my decision thus far has been to try to sacrifice my time rather than take other risks in trying to juggle both jobs at the same time. Thankfully, it's been working to some degree, so I'm happy. It is working somehow.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's important to, stick with it. I think a lot of people start a YouTube channel and they do it for a year and they don't see anything.
Absolutely.
And so then they quit. But it's important to, stay consistent, stick with it. And like you'll eventually see a return on your investment, the time and effort that you put into it. It is important to, try and get better. Like if you go a year on YouTube and you don't see any growth, then you may need
100%.
to change your I guess what you're doing, your workflow or your production quality or something. But if you
Absolutely.
stick
Yeah.
with it, you should be able to grow at least a little bit. So
Absolutely. And on that point, because I always treated it as a job, I had KPIs and metrics for myself that I set every single year. And then I would, throughout the year, check if I'm on track or not. So I had growth metrics on so many different, KPIs that I would constantly monitor. And my objective was constant growth. And I had very strict, KPIs that I set to myself. And thankfully, year on year, I've been able to achieve all those. And that's why I keep on doing it, because I know I am growing, maybe at a slower rate than if I was doing it full time. But it's important to grow. Otherwise, you're doing the same thing over and over again and just, running around in
right.
circles. So yeah,
Why are you doing it at that point?
exactly. Yeah.